Bruce had always risen early, before the sun had a chance to climb over the hills to tend to the ranch. The sky was still dark, the air crisp with the chill of early spring. He pulled his weathered coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he stepped out onto the porch. The barn was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the animals. Bruce took a deep breath, smelling the familiar scent of hay, wood, and earth. It was a comforting smell, one he had known all his life. He made his way across the yard, the dirt crunching beneath his boots. The barn door creaked as he opened it, and the dim light from the lantern in his hand flickered across the wooden beams and stacked hay. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the stalls, his mind already on the day's work. But then something in the third stall caught his eye, a movement that made him stop dead in his tracks. Curled up in a corner, hidden amongst the hay bales, was a woman. Her ragged dress was torn and dirty, her skin pale and streaked with grime. She looked like a hunted animal, her eyes wide with fear, darting nervously around the barn. Her body was hunched as though she was trying to make herself as small as possible, hoping the darkness would shield her. Bruce froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, but there was no mistaking the terror in her eyes. He took a step closer, his voice low and cautious. "Who are you?" The woman flinched, her trembling hands clutching something tightly to her chest. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed shut, and unmistakably familiar. Bruce's heart skipped a beat. The handwriting on the front was his. The very letter he had written 3 years ago. The letter he had never sent. The one he had hidden beneath the floorboards of an abandoned line shack. The letter that had been his final goodbye to Caroline, his would-be mail-order bride. The woman's eyes locked onto his. She was still terrified, but there was something else, a strange recognition in her gaze. She didn't answer his question immediately. Instead, her lips parted in a voice so soft, so weak, it barely reached his ears. She whispered, "She was my sister." Bruce's mind raced. His heart pounded in his chest. What? He stepped closer, his boots shifting in the hay, his gaze never leaving her. "How do you have that letter? How do you know about Caroline?" She collapsed forward, the envelope slipping from her grasp, her body crumpling against the hay. Bruce rushed to her, instinctively reaching out to catch her before she hit the ground. She was burning with fever, her body frail and exhausted. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, and her eyes fluttered as if she was on the edge of consciousness. Without thinking, Bruce scooped her up in his arms, careful to hold her gently. He carried her out of the barn and across the yard, his mind still reeling from the shock of it all. The barn door slammed behind him, and the early morning stillness seemed to press in on him, thick with questions he couldn't answer. He entered the house, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the cold, damp night. Bruce made his way up the narrow staircase to the guest room. He laid her down on the bed, smoothing her tangled hair away from her face. She was barely conscious, but her lips moved again, barely audible. Caroline, she never made it. She died on the road. Bruce's chest tightened. He had never known what happened to Caroline after he sent his last letter. He had written it to her in a moment of despair, telling her he wasn't worthy of love, that he had nothing to offer. He had tucked it away, hidden it in the floorboards of the lined shack where he had once hoped to make a new life. He thought she had changed her mind. Maybe she had. Maybe she never came. But now, this woman, this stranger, was holding his letter, and she was claiming to be Caroline's sister. He lingered at the foot of the bed, his heart heavy with the weight of the past and the confusion of the present. What was this all about? How could this woman have come across a letter he had hidden so carefully? How was she connected to Caroline? The silence in the room pressed down on him. He wanted answers, but the woman, Sherry, she had said her name was unconscious. He couldn't press her now. His gaze fell to the letter she had dropped beside her on the bed. His own handwriting, his own words, staring up at him as if mocking him. He had hidden it away, tried to forget the pain of losing Caroline before they had even met. And now, this woman was here, holding the key to a story he thought had ended long ago. Bruce sat in the chair beside the bed, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his mind still spinning. The silence in the room was only broken by the soft, steady sound of Sherry's breathing. He couldn't help but wonder what other secret she held, and what her presence meant for him. As the dawn light slowly began to creep into the room, Sherry's voice broke the stillness again. Her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered, her voice faint and strained. Caroline, she never wanted to leave. She was coming to you. Bruce's heart stopped. The weight of her words crushed him. She was coming to me. But Caroline never arrived. She never came. And now this woman, this stranger, was here, clutching his letter, and in her feverish delirium, had just whispered the name that haunted him most. Caroline. Bruce sat still, his heart heavy with regret. The past was never truly gone. It had a way of creeping back into your life when you least expected it. And now, with this woman in his care, he was forced to face the ghosts of his past head-on. The room was quiet again, and the sun continued its slow rise over the horizon. Bruce's thoughts raced, but he couldn't escape the nagging question that burned through his mind. What did this woman want with him? Sherry woke with a start, her breath shallow and ragged, as if she had been running for miles. Her eyes shot open, panic flashing across her face as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. The room was warm, the air heavy with the scent of herbs, and something faintly sweet, like bread. The faint light of morning filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. She was no longer in the barn. She was in a bed. But where? And who was she with? A glass of water was placed carefully on the nightstand beside her, and a piece of bread sat beside it, tempting in its simplicity. Her mind raced as memories of the night before came rushing back. The barn, the letter, the man who had found her. She felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion, but the fear that had gripped her before was still there, lingering like a shadow in the corners of her mind. She sat up slowly, wincing at the ache in her body. The room spun for a moment, but then the door creaked open, and Bruce stepped inside. His broad frame filled the doorway, and his eyes softened when he saw her awake. He carried himself with an ease that belied the tension in his face, the same tension that had been there the night before. He held out a cup of water and placed it gently on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" he asked in a low voice, the question more out of courtesy than concern, though his eyes betrayed his unease. Sherry swallowed hard, her throat dry. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She had so much to say, but the words tangled in her mind like a knot. She looked down at her hands, still trembling. After a long pause, she met his gaze. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't deserve any of this." Bruce shook his head, a gesture of dismissal. "You don't need to apologize," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "No one deserves this. You're safe now." Sherry studied him carefully. There was something about him, something that made her feel both comforted and fearful at the same time. His eyes were deep, dark, almost haunted, like a man who had seen too much loss. She could sense that he carried the weight of grief with him, like an invisible chain. The quiet tension between them seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. "I'm Sherry," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Caroline was my sister. I don't know how to explain this, but she never made it to you. She died on the way here." Bruce's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as the words sank in. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of guilt settling heavily on his shoulders. He had known, of course, that Caroline never arrived. He had assumed she had changed her mind, had found someone else, or had simply given up on him. But the truth was far worse. She hadn't arrived because she had never made it. The road had claimed her long before she could ever reach him. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled, to control the rush of emotions threatening to spill over. Sherry looked at him carefully, as though she was studying the way his expression shifted, trying to understand the man who had once written her sister those heartfelt letters. 3 years ago, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I wrote to Caroline. I told her I wasn't worthy of her. I told her I wasn't fit to be anyone's husband. I had lost so much before, and I feared I'd only bring her more pain. I wrote that letter, and I never sent it. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. I thought she'd never come. I thought she had changed her mind. I hid the letter away, thinking I could forget. But now you're here with it, and I don't know what to make of that. Sherry's eyes softened with sympathy, and she reached out to place a hand on his. The gesture was small, but it felt like a lifeline to Bruce. He hadn't expected kindness, not after all this time. Caroline, Sherry said softly, wasn't running from you. She was running from something far worse. She paused, looking away, her mind turning back to the life her sister had led before the road had claimed her. She worked for the Thorntons, a wealthy family back east. She was their maid, but she saw things, terrible things. She saw Mr. Thornton cover up a man's death. She found the ledgers, the ones that would have exposed him. She took them with her, hoping they would protect her, but she was being hunted. That's why she came out west. She thought she could escape. She thought she could find safety with you. Bruce's mind spun. He had known that Caroline had been brave, but he had no idea she had been running for her life. He felt his chest tighten as the weight of her sacrifice hit him. She had come to him thinking she would be safe, and he hadn't been there for her. He stopped himself, unsure how to continue. I didn't know. Sherry nodded, the pain in her eyes deepening as she spoke. She didn't want you to know. She didn't want to bring you into this mess. But once she got here, she choked on the words, her eyes filling with tears. She was killed, 3 days out. The accident, the one they said was a robbery, it wasn't. It was them. The Thorntons sent someone after her. The men who killed her are still looking for witnesses. And now they're looking for me. Bruce's stomach twisted. The pieces were falling into place, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had believed, deep down, that Caroline had died because of him, because he had pushed her away. Now, he was learning the truth. It wasn't his fault, but it didn't matter. The fact remained that Caroline was gone. And this woman, Sherry, her sister, was in danger because of something she had never asked for. Something she couldn't escape. You're safe here, Bruce said, his voice hardening with a newfound determination. You're under my protection now. I'll make sure they don't get to you. Sherry's gaze softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. There was something about him, something fierce in his eyes, that made her feel, for the first time in months, like she wasn't alone. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the quiet crackle of the fire. Bruce's mind was racing, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take her away from him. Not after everything she had been through. Not after everything they both had lost. As the minutes passed, the tension began to shift, and something deeper started to stir between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a connection, fragile and tentative, built on shared loss and mutual understanding. They were two broken people, but maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. Bruce looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll protect you, Sherry. You have my word. And for the first time in years, Sherry believed him. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows against the walls of the small sitting room. Sherry sat across from Bruce, her fingers tightly clasped in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between him and the floor. The tension in the room was palpable, heavy with unspoken words, but there was no going back now. She had to tell him the truth. Caroline didn't come out west just to find you, she began, her voice quiet but steady, as if the act of speaking the words would make them real. Bruce leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers, his face etched with a mixture of confusion and determination. Then why did she come? He asked, his voice low, the question hanging in the air. Sherry took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she spoke. She was working for the Thorntons, a wealthy family back east. Mr. Thornton was a powerful man, but he had a secret. He killed his business partner, his closest friend, and covered it up. Caroline saw it. She found the ledgers that would have ruined him, and she kept them, hoping they'd keep her safe. She thought the only way to escape him and the danger was to disappear, to start a new life, and the mail-order bride service seemed like the perfect cover. Bruce's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he had once dreamed of marrying, the one who had never arrived, had been running from something far worse than loneliness or a broken heart. She had been running from a man who would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. She didn't just leave, Sherry continued, her voice tight with emotion. She was forced to leave. She had no choice, and someone was following her. The Thorntons' hired man, a man named Dalton, was tracking her every move. She didn't even know how far they would go to get those ledgers back. But she was desperate. She thought she could trust the mail-order bride service, but it wasn't enough. She came to you because she thought you'd be her escape. Bruce sat back, his hands clenching into fists as the weight of the truth settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He had never known the full story, had never understood why Caroline had never arrived, but now the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The unsent letter, the sudden disappearance of the woman he had written to, it all made sense in the worst possible way. He had never known the danger she had been in, the true cost of the dreams they had shared through their letters. So, she was killed on the road, Bruce said quietly, more to himself than to Sherry, as if speaking the words aloud might make them real. Sherry nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. 3 days out. The accident they told you about, it wasn't an accident. They made it look like a robbery gone wrong, but it was Dalton. He's the one who killed her. And now he's after me. Bruce's stomach turned. He had always suspected that there was more to Caroline's disappearance than he had been told, but he had never imagined something so dark. The truth was worse than anything he could have dreamed. I thought she just didn't want me. That I wasn't enough, Bruce whispered, his voice filled with guilt and self-loathing. I wrote her that letter, the one I never sent. I told her I was cursed, that anyone who came to me would end up hurt. I thought I had driven her away. But now I find out she came for me, and she died on the way. His voice trailed off, and he looked at Sherry, his heart heavy with the weight of his own regrets. Sherry's expression softened, and she shook her head slowly. You didn't kill her, Bruce. You didn't drive her away. She came for you because she loved you. But she was running from something much bigger than the two of you, and she never got the chance to explain. Her voice quivered as she spoke, the grief in her eyes too familiar. She had lost so much, just like him. She wanted to make a life with you, but she couldn't outrun them. And now it's my turn to run. Bruce's mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had just been revealed. He had always thought of himself as a man living in the past, haunted by his wife's death and the loss of his dreams. But now, this new truth was threatening to break the fragile peace he had built in his life. He had spent 3 years hiding from the world, from any possibility of happiness, convinced that he was cursed. And yet here he was, face to face with a woman who had lost everything, just like him. Her sister had come to him for safety, for a future they would never share, and now Sherry was carrying the weight of that same danger on her shoulders. Bruce stood abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides, his gaze fierce. You're safe here, he said, his voice low and steady. I don't care who's after you, Sherry. No one's going to hurt you while I'm here. I swear it. He walked toward the window, his thoughts racing. The danger that had haunted Caroline was now after Sherry, and he was determined to stop it. He wouldn't let anyone else die because of him. The memory of Caroline's face, the letters they had shared, the promise of a future that would never be, all of it came crashing down on him like a wave. And yet, there was something else building inside of him, something new, a fierce protectiveness for Sherry, a feeling he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was a part of his life, and he wasn't going to let her go. Sherry's eyes followed him, a silent understanding passing between them. She could see it in his eyes, the resolve hardening there. He wasn't just offering her protection anymore. He was offering her a future. It wasn't the one either of them had expected, but it was real, and it was all they had left. She wasn't alone anymore. Bruce turned back to face her, his gaze softer now, the edge of determination tempered by something gentler. "You're not alone in this. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe." And for the first time in what felt like years, Sherry allowed herself to believe him. She didn't know how this would end, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was running anymore. She was fighting for something, and maybe, just maybe, she had found a reason to stay. Bruce sat alone by the fire later that evening, the shadows from the flickering flames stretching long across the room, and he could feel the weight of everything that had unfolded pressing down on him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded letter, the one he had written to Caroline 3 years ago, the one he had hidden away in the old line shack, and the very letter Sherry had been holding in her hands when he found her. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded it, the creases of time deepening the paper, the ink faded but still legible. As he read the words, a tight knot formed in his chest. His own voice echoed in his mind as he remembered writing the letter. "Caroline, I am not worthy of your love. I have nothing to offer you but a broken man and a cursed life. My wife is gone. My son never had the chance to live. I am only fit to be alone." The words he had written in a moment of despair were still true, and yet they felt so different now. Back then, he had written them as a final goodbye, as a way to protect her from the mess of his life, to shield her from the pain that had already consumed him. But now, reading them again, he couldn't help but feel the sting of regret. Caroline had come, despite his fears, and now she was dead, and he was left with the burden of their unspoken promises. He closed his eyes for a moment, as the guilt settled back into his bones, heavy and suffocating. He had been so sure that he was cursed, that anyone who came into his life would be doomed to the same sorrow that had claimed his wife and son. But Caroline had come, and she had died anyway, proving that he had no control over fate. The ache of losing her hit him again, sharper than before. "You didn't kill anyone," he heard Sherry's voice say, as if it had come from the other side of the room. He hadn't realized she had come in, her soft footsteps almost silent against the wooden floor. She stood in the doorway, watching him with eyes that were filled with understanding, her own grief still raw. "You're not cursed," she continued, her voice steady but kind. "You're just afraid. Afraid of what you can't control, afraid of what you might lose. But you're not cursed, Bruce. And Caroline, she didn't die because of you. She died because of the people who were chasing her, the ones who would have killed anyone who stood in their way." Her words, simple and direct, pierced through the fog of self-doubt that had clouded his mind for so long. For a moment, Bruce didn't know what to say. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding on to, how much of his past was still anchored to the weight of Caroline's death. He had thought that by keeping his distance, by pushing her away before she could get too close, he was protecting her. But in the end, all he had done was let her slip away, and now Sherry, her sister, was here, carrying the weight of that loss too. She stepped into the room slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You didn't drive her away, Bruce," she said again, her voice gentle. "She came because she wanted to, because she believed in what you could have together. But the world wasn't ready for that. The world wasn't kind enough to let her have a happy ending." Bruce swallowed hard, the tightness in his throat threatening to choke him. He hadn't expected her words to have the impact they did, but they cut through the years of self-recrimination, clearing away some of the fog that had clouded his heart. He had spent so much time blaming himself for her death, for never sending the letter, for never fighting harder to keep her, that he had never stopped to see the full picture. Caroline had been brave, maybe braver than he had ever been, and she had fought to survive right up until the end. And now, Sherry was here, a reminder of everything he had lost, but also a chance for something new. Bruce looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who had come to him in desperation, but someone who had lived through the same kind of loss, someone who had endured the kind of pain he knew all too well. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't I didn't know how to be the man I thought I was supposed to be. I thought I had to be alone. I thought I couldn't let anyone in, not after what happened to Sarah. But maybe I was wrong." Sherry's eyes softened, and she walked closer to him, taking a seat across from him at the table. "We're both broken, Bruce," she said quietly. "But maybe broken people fit together better." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, the weight of her words settling deep into his chest. He had always believed that love was a curse, something that brought only pain and loss. But Sherry had shown him another side of it, a side where love was about survival, about finding someone who understood your pain and helped you bear it. "Maybe you're right," he said, the words barely above a whisper. "Maybe we're not so different after all." She nodded, a small, sad smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "We both have scars, Bruce. And maybe it's the scars that make us stronger, not weaker." Bruce didn't know if he believed in love the way he had before. He didn't know if he could ever believe in it the way he had with Caroline. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. And maybe that was enough. Over the next few days, the house began to feel different. Sherry began helping out with the ranch work, a quiet presence that brought life back to the place that had once felt so hollow. She mended his shirts, cooked meals, and tended to the garden. And as she did, Bruce couldn't help but notice the way the house seemed to come alive again. It wasn't just the work that she did, it was the way she moved through the space as if she belonged there. Her small gestures of care, fixing a squeaky door, making sure the fire was stoked, began to chip away at the loneliness that had taken root in his heart. He found himself watching her more and more, his thoughts lingering on her long after the day's work was done. There were moments when their hands brushed, when their eyes met across the room, and Bruce could feel the tension growing between them, slow and steady, like the rising tide. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew that things were changing. And in those quiet moments when Sherry smiled at him or simply sat beside him, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, something worth fighting for. But even as hope began to take root in his heart, there was still the shadow of danger that loomed over them both. They weren't safe, not yet. And Bruce knew that no matter how much he wanted to believe in second chances, he couldn't forget the threat that was still out there. The Thorntons' men were still looking for Sherry, and sooner or later, they would come for her. Bruce couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to make sure they were ready. The wind howled through the trees, the storm threatening to turn the sky black with its fury. Inside the ranch house, Bruce paced back and forth, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The storm wasn't just outside. It was inside him too, building, growing, a sense of unease settling into his gut. His mind raced, thinking of the warning from Tommy earlier that morning. A stranger had come into town, a man who had been asking questions about Sherry, about a young woman traveling alone. Bruce couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. He stepped to the window, peering through the glass, his eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had come up fast, the dark clouds rolling in from the west, but Bruce wasn't looking at the weather. He was looking for the danger he knew was coming. Sherry had been quiet all day, working alongside him on the ranch, but now she was in the house, her eyes darting nervously as she set the table. It had been weeks since she'd arrived, but Bruce could feel the growing tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. She hadn't said much about her past since their long conversation, and Bruce hadn't pressed her, but he could tell it weighed heavily on her. She had lost her sister, had witnessed things no one should have, and now she was hiding from men who wouldn't stop until they found her. The thought of losing her of everything going wrong, twisted in his chest. Tommy's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and urgent. "Bruce, the fence has been damaged. Cattle scattered on the north pasture. We need to move fast if we're going to get him back in before the storm hits hard." Bruce didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. Get Eli and get those cattle penned." Tommy nodded and turned to head outside. Bruce quickly grabbed his coat, pulling on over his shoulders, his mind still racing. He needed to act. He couldn't risk waiting any longer. As he walked toward the door, Sherry appeared in the hallway, her face pale, her hands wringing the edge of her apron. "Bruce," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "the man they sent, he's coming. Isn't he?" Bruce stopped in his tracks, his heart hammering. She knew. She had known the moment Tommy had mentioned the cattle. The look on her face confirmed everything he had feared. "He's coming," Bruce said, his voice tight. "But you're safe here. I won't let him get to you. Not while I'm alive." Sherry nodded, but there was a tremor in her eyes. "I don't want to put you in danger. I don't want to bring this curse down on you." Bruce shook his head, his voice firm. "This isn't your fault, and you're not a curse. You're here because I promised to protect you. That's what I'm going to do." He took a deep breath, the air thick with the weight of his promise. As they stepped outside into the storm, the wind howling around them, Bruce could feel the tension tightening with every passing second. The storm, the cattle, the threat of Dalton, it all felt like it was converging in one place, one moment. They worked quickly, rounding up the cattle, making sure the fence was secured before the worst of the storm hit. The rain had already started to fall in sheets, cold and relentless, soaking through their clothes as they worked. Sherry stayed close to Bruce, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, and every now and then he would catch a glimpse of her face, the fear still there, buried beneath the surface. She didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to make him worry, but Bruce could see it in her eyes. She was afraid, and as much as he wanted to reassure her, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The storm raged on, but they managed to get the last of the cattle corralled just as the wind began to howl louder, the first flashes of lightning illuminating the dark sky. Bruce glanced toward the house, his eyes narrowing. He couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Just as they finished securing the last fence post, Tommy came riding back, his face grim. "Bruce," he called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. "There's a rider in the distance. He's coming this way." Bruce's heart sank. "Get to the house. Now." They all moved quickly, rushing toward the barn, but Bruce couldn't help but feel a sense of dread that weighed heavily on him. He knew who it was. It could only be one man, Dalton, the enforcer sent by the Thorntons. The man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Bruce motioned for Sherry to stay inside the barn, out of sight, as he grabbed his rifle and checked it quickly. He could hear the horses' hooves getting closer, the sound of them slicing through the rain-soaked ground. His pulse quickened. It wasn't just the storm coming. It was Dalton. "Stay here," he said to Tommy and Eli, his voice low and steady. "I'll handle this." Tommy and Eli nodded, their eyes filled with determination. They were ready. But Bruce knew this wasn't going to be a fight he could win with guns alone. This was a fight for Sherry's life. As Bruce stepped out into the rain, the storm swirling around him like a living thing, he saw Dalton's figure emerging from the shadows, a dark silhouette against the flickering lightning. He was tall, well-dressed, and the calm menace in his posture told Bruce everything he needed to know. Dalton didn't say a word, just stared at Bruce, his cold eyes calculating, assessing the situation. Bruce raised his rifle, steadying his grip. "You're trespassing," Bruce said, his voice firm, though his heart was pounding. "Leave now, and I won't have to make you regret it." Dalton's lips curled into a thin smile, his eyes narrowing. "I'm just here for what's mine, Bruce. The Thorntons want their property back." His voice was smooth, like oil on water, and Bruce could feel the threat hanging in the air like a noose tightening around his neck. "You have no claim here. Bruce spat, his grip tightening on the rifle. "You're not welcome. So get off my land, or I'll make sure you leave in pieces." Dalton's smile faded, but he didn't move, just stared at Bruce, calculating his next move. The storm roared louder, and Bruce could feel the weight of everything coming to a head. The stakes had never been higher, and he wasn't going to let Sherry pay for his past mistakes. The storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the earth, but the tension between Bruce and Dalton was even more oppressive. The two men stood facing each other in the rain, their rifles aimed but not yet fired. The air was thick with the promise of violence, the quiet before the storm finally broke. Bruce's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Dalton, his instincts on high alert. He had been in enough confrontations to know that this was a standoff, one that could end in bloodshed if either of them made the wrong move. The sound of the rain on the ground was the only thing that filled the air between them, but even that felt distant, as though the world had slowed down to give this moment the gravity it deserved. Dalton's eyes, cold and calculating, never left Bruce's, and Bruce could feel the weight of those eyes, the threat in them, the pressure building as they sized each other up. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then Dalton spoke, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I'm not here to fight, Bruce. I'm here for what's mine. The Thorntons want their property back, and I intend to get it, one way or another." Bruce's grip on his rifle tightened, his knuckles white. He knew what Dalton meant, the ledgers that Caroline had stolen, the evidence of the Thorntons' crimes. He knew that, without those ledgers, Dalton would stop at nothing to get rid of anyone who stood in his way. Bruce's mind raced. He had promised Sherry that she was safe here, but he knew now that the only way to truly keep her safe was to stand his ground. He wasn't going to let this man take her from him, not after everything she had been through. "You're trespassing," Bruce said, his voice low but firm. "And I don't care what the Thorntons want. You're not taking her, and you're not taking anything else. You leave now, or I'll make sure you don't leave at all." Dalton's smile was thin and cold, his eyes narrowing in amusement. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice quiet, like he was talking to a child. "You think you can just hide her away like some kind of treasure? You think the Thorntons won't come for you, for her? They always get what they want, Bruce. And right now, what they want is her and those damn ledgers." Bruce's heart thundered in his chest. He could feel the weight of the threat hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when it came to Sherry. "I'm not letting you have her," Bruce said, his voice unwavering. "And if it comes to it, I'll kill you before I let you take her." Dalton's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. He wasn't afraid of Bruce, but he knew there was something else here, something Bruce was willing to fight for. That was what made him dangerous. That was what made this standoff different. "You're a stubborn bastard, Bruce," Dalton said, his tone dripping with contempt. "But you're also a fool if you think you can protect her from me. The Thorntons are bigger than you. They're bigger than both of us." Bruce didn't flinch. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to let Dalton, let anyone, take Sherry. His thoughts raced, and in that moment, a plan formed in his mind. There was more to this than just a confrontation. He couldn't just fight Dalton and hope it ended well. He had to outsmart him. He had to make Dalton believe he had something he wanted, something worth bargaining for. Bruce took a slow, deliberate breath, his eyes never leaving Dalton's. "I'll make you a deal," Bruce said, his voice steady. "You leave, right now, and I'll give you what you want. The ledgers. I'll tell you where they are. But if you try anything else, if you lay a hand on her, I'll kill you before you get one step closer." Dalton paused, his gaze flickering for the briefest moment, a sign of doubt flashing in his eyes. Bruce knew he had him. He could see it in the shift of Dalton's posture, the slight hesitation in his movements. "You think I'm stupid?" Dalton said, his voice now laced with suspicion. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away with my prize?" "I don't think so, Bruce. You're a dead man either way." Bruce didn't flinch. "I'm not offering you a choice, Dalton," he said coldly. "I'm giving you an ultimatum. Take the ledgers and go, or I'll make sure you never get the chance to hurt anyone again." For a long moment, Dalton didn't move, his cold eyes locked onto Bruce's. And then, in an instant, the tension broke. Dalton's hand shot toward his gun, but before he could draw it, Bruce raised his rifle, taking aim with practiced precision. Dalton's hand froze mid-motion. "I told you," Bruce said, his voice low and deadly. "Make the wrong move, and I'll shoot. Don't think I won't." Dalton's expression darkened, but he didn't move. He knew he was outmatched, that he had no leverage. Bruce wasn't the broken man he had assumed, the man who would back down. Bruce was stronger than he had ever been, and he wasn't going to let fear control him anymore. The storm raged around them, the thunder crashing above, but the standoff held. Finally, Dalton's lips twisted into a thin, humorless smile. "You're lucky," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't over." And with that, he turned, walking away into the storm, disappearing into the night. Bruce stood motionless, his rifle still raised, his heart pounding in his chest. He had won, for now, but the war was far from over. He knew that Dalton would be back, and the Thorntons wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But for tonight, Sherry was safe. Tonight, they had survived. The first light of morning broke through the storm clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the land. Sherry woke slowly, her body sore from the events of the night before, but her mind surprisingly clear. The storm had passed, and with it, the immediate danger that had threatened her life. The ranch was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of life that seemed to carry through the stillness. She lay there for a moment, eyes closed, feeling the warmth of the bed and the safety of the house around her. The nightmare of Dalton and the Thorntons seemed like a distant memory now, though Sherry knew it wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear, peace. She sat up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed and brushing her hair back from her face. The light coming through the window had the warmth of a new day, but it also had the scent of change in the air. She heard voices downstairs, Bruce and Tommy, speaking in low tones. They were likely talking about the events of last night, the confrontation with Dalton, the fear of what would come next. Bruce had promised her protection, but Sherry knew promises were fragile things in the world they lived in. She dressed quickly, the quiet of the house a stark contrast to the stormy chaos of the night. When she descended the stairs, she found Bruce standing by the fireplace, his back to her as he stoked the fire. Tommy stood by the door, his coat on, preparing to leave. Sherry's gaze lingered on Bruce for a moment longer than she intended. He was always so calm, so strong, and though he'd seemed broken when she first arrived, she could see the quiet strength in him now. It wasn't just his physical presence. It was the way he stood, the way he moved, as if he had made peace with the battles of his past. He had always carried the weight of loss on his shoulders, but now there was something new, something growing. She could feel it too. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of a day that promised something more than survival. Bruce turned, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Morning, Sherry. You sleeping all right?" She smiled and nodded, though there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "Better than I expected." Tommy cleared his throat, stepping forward. "I'll head into town, check in with the marshal," he said, his voice steady. "Make sure Dalton isn't causing more trouble, and see if there's anything else we need to do." Bruce nodded, his expression serious. "Be careful. Don't take any chances. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." Tommy's eyes flickered toward Sherry before he nodded. "I will." He pulled his hat down over his brow, giving Bruce a quick, respectful nod before leaving through the front door. Sherry watched him go, the quiet moment between her and Bruce stretching longer than expected. She could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "I was thinking," Bruce began, breaking the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "The marshal's got things under control now. The Thorntons are as good as finished. The Ledgers will do their part, and Dalton won't be coming back. But that doesn't mean everything's all right. Not yet. There's still the matter of what comes next. His eyes met hers then, searching like he was trying to read her thoughts, trying to understand what she needed, what she wanted. What do you want, Sherry? Her heart tightened to the question, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she feared it. The truth was, she wasn't sure. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't know what the future held. The danger that had haunted her for so long was gone. But now she faced the daunting uncertainty of what came next. She had come west to escape, to survive, but now she was here with Bruce on his ranch, and for the first time, she felt something other than fear. She felt like she might belong. Her voice was barely a whisper as she answered, the words coming slow, unsure. I don't know, she said. I thought I was running toward something, toward a future that was better than the life I had back east. But now it feels like I'm running out of time, like I'm just waiting. Bruce stepped toward her, his gaze softening. He reached out, taking her hand in his touch warm and grounding. You're not waiting anymore, he said gently. You don't have to be afraid of what comes next. You've already come this far, and I'm here. You don't have to keep running. The words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding on to, how much fear had still lingered in her heart, even after the danger had passed. Bruce wasn't just offering protection. He was offering something else, something more. He was offering her a chance to build a life, not just survive one. And for the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to believe it. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, she admitted, but I want to be here. With you. I want to help. I want to be part of something that's real. Bruce's expression softened even more, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He squeezed her hand gently. Then let's make it real, he said quietly. We'll figure it out together. His words hung in the air, and in that moment, Sherry felt a shift in herself. The fear, the uncertainty, the pain, they hadn't disappeared, but they no longer held the same weight. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something new, something worth building, something worth staying for. As the day unfolded, the tension of the previous nights seemed to ease, and the ranch began to feel more like a home than it ever had before. Bruce and Sherry worked side by side, tending to the chores, fixing the fences, and caring for the animals. There was a new rhythm to their life, one that had its own kind of peace. And through it all, Sherry couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in herself. How the loneliness that had once gripped her heart seemed to ease with every day spent here, with every moment shared with Bruce. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that for the first time in a long while, she was where she needed to be. That evening, after the work was done, Bruce pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was a letter folded carefully, the ink fresh. He handed it to her with a soft smile. I wrote this for you, he said, his voice low. Sherry took the letter, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. She read aloud, her voice catching on the words. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking for your pity. What I'm asking for is a chance to build a life with you. I'm not asking you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. I'm asking you to stay because I want you here. I've come to realize that I don't just want to protect you. I want to build something with you. And if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Will you marry me? Her heart skipped a beat, and tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. Bruce's gaze was soft, vulnerable, as he waited for her response. She smiled through her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke the only answer she could. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The future had never seemed clearer. The danger was gone, the fear was fading, and now there was only hope. Hope for a life that they would build together side by side. And as the sun set, casting its golden light across the ranch, Sherry realized she wasn't just home. She had finally found the place where she truly belonged.